Since we have a quorum and we're at the scheduled meeting time, let's go ahead and call the meeting to order. And we just have the one item today, which is the mid-biennial budget update. So take it away, Carrie.
Okay, let me share my screen. Okay. So good evening, everyone. Tonight, we're just going to be providing you a mid-biennial budget update, which includes an overview of the proposed budget adjustments. Oops, got something kind of frozen here.
Yeah, I'm not seeing your screen, Carrie.
Oh, I am totally frozen. Whoops.
There we go. Okay.
Okay. Now my whole thing froze up there for a second. So you can see my presentation?
Yes.
Is that correct? Okay, thank you. So good evening, everyone. We're going to be providing you a mid-biennial budget update, which includes just an overview of the proposed budget adjustments. So tonight's just going to be an overview, and then over the next couple of weeks, there'll be a chance for questions, and then there's going to be a public hearing held for October 18th, and then council will have time to deliberate after the public comment. So we passed the budget last year, estimating revenues fairly conservatively with some projections of a slow recovery from the pandemic. Some of the revenues did better than expected, and some were lagging behind more than we had originally estimated. So this budget adjustment will be updating those revenues based on what we have seen over the past 8 to 9 months. The budget adjustment will also include some housekeeping adjustments to incorporate prior council actions, adjustments for unexpected costs, and proposed departmental changes. And then lastly, there'll be some legislation that we will need to be done in order to make some of these changes. We will need to adopt an ordinance to set the property tax levy for 2022. We will need to adopt an ordinance for the proposed budget adjustments, and then adopt a resolution for the updates to the fee schedule. So this is the proposed calendar for the mid-biennium review. There's quite a few things that we need to do over the next month. So tonight we're just going to summarize the proposed adjustments and give an update on the general fund revenues. And then we will have our first of 2 public hearings scheduled for October 18th. Then next on November 1st, we will return to the committee of the whole and follow up on any questions and finalize the committee report. Later that evening at the regular council meeting, we will have the second and final public hearing for the budget. And at the same meeting on November 1st, we will adopt the committee report and have the first reading of the ordinances. And then lastly, on November 15th at the regular council meeting, we will review the ordinances for the final reading and adopt the fee schedule resolution. So this schedule we've laid out will allow us to adopt the ordinances required to set the property tax levy, and this needs to be done and communicated to King County no later than November 30th. So just an update on how we're doing in comparison to budget for some of the larger general fund revenues. For property tax, state law allows cities to increase the base property tax levy of inflation or the lower of inflation or 1%, plus new construction. So inflation is set as the implicit price deflator, and it's set in September. And this year we are over 3%. So unlike last year where the inflation is higher than the 1%, so we are going to be limited to just levy the 1% of our allowable levy base. As you look at some of our historical property tax revenues, just as a reminder, we had a significant drop in revenues in 2017, and that's when the city council committed at this time to adjust property tax downward when the fire authority was formed. And this adjustment in property tax did allow us to bank that capacity, so we can use that capacity at a later time if we do choose to. Also in 2019, you see a slight increase in property taxes, and this was for debt service payments for the Parks Capital Improvement Bond that was issued that year. So we have seen these revenues stay pretty consistent through the pandemic, so that's good. This is just a snapshot of how we go about setting the property tax levy, and so we're going to be doing the 1% because inflation is higher than the 1% this year. These numbers are just from King County, are just preliminary, and they're subject to change. As you can see, we still don't have all the information from King County. We're still waiting for some prior year refund numbers, and that new construction value sometimes changes quite a bit. So as we get updated figures from King County, we will be updating the ordinance as well. The 2022 property tax levy will be approximately 23 million, which is about 1 million higher than last year's budgeted figure. And the maximum statutory levy would be at 64 million. So we could choose to go up that high if we wanted to. Again, we gained a lot of capacity as a result of lowering our property tax when the RFA was formed. So we do have some ability and growth here if we do choose to do that. The estimated levy rate is just under $1.01 per $1,000 of assessed valuation, and that is lower than the $1.10 rate from 21. And so this reduced rate is just a direct result of the year-over-year growth in assessed valuation. So how it works is the assessed valuation of the property in the property valuation in Renton is at 23.1 billion, which increased about 11% this last year. So as the assessed valuation increases at a faster rate than we're allowed to levy, that overall levy rate goes down. The city is proposing no increase other than the allowed 1% in new construction. And just with our cost of doing business going up more than 1% each year, this limitation impacts how we spend down our fund balance in future projection years. Sales tax, this represents the actual historical and budgeted figures. Overall 21 collections were much better than previously predicted. Because of the pandemic, we really entered 21 and 22 conservatively, and the sales taxes really are the most volatile during times of economic stress. So we originally had expected some recovery in 21, but we have seen a much larger growth than we had originally expected. This could be largely due to stimulus money that we received late last year and the beginning of this year. And so it will be really interesting to see how this continues to play out. This chart also shows, this red section shows that in prior years we did receive a sales tax annexation credit, and that was the last time we received that was in 2018. And so previously we received from this credit about $3 million in sales tax annexation credit in prior years. So that was a pretty big decrease when that fell off in 2018. We did start to receive some local revitalization funding, or also called LRF funding, starting in 2019 to support the LRF bond issue. That was, that's about $500,000 for that bond payment, and we'll be receiving that over the next 25 years. And that's also depicted in red on this chart. So we increased the sales tax budget by $2 million at the Q2 budget adjustment, and we're proposing to increase it another $1 million at the mid-buy budget adjustment for sales tax revenue for both 21 and 22 based on what we're seeing. This slide represents the last 2 years and the current year estimated sales tax by category. And so as you can see, the retail is 29%, services are 24%. And then just one area of note of some interest to me is that there is an increase we're seeing this year in sales tax from construction. So historically, construction increases are fairly short-lived and cyclical in nature. And so we want to keep our eye on this and not plan to increase our budget based on the construction category. We want to make sure that we're kind of setting that aside for some longer-term projects and not plan on using that for ongoing operations, just because we do typically see that kind of go up and down. So later on in the presentation, we will be recommending to fund some very old and aging infrastructure that needs some attention. So B&O tax also did fairly well this year. We started again, was hit significantly last year. We saw a really big decrease in 2020 because of the pandemic. And so we began the year very careful, wondering kind of how we were going to recover. We just weren't sure how some of our larger taxpayers would recover from the various economic factors that were out there. With that said, the 21 revenues were coming in much higher. We increased the budget $3 million in the Q2 budget adjustment, and we're proposing another $1.5 million increase at the mid-buy for 21. So that will bring us to $11 million for B&O taxes. We are also proposing just a $500,000 increase in the budget for 2022. We did plan on some recovery for 2022, and also the 21 figures do include some one-time revenues of about $1.2 million of some taxes that were supposed to be due in 2020 that weren't paid in 21. So we want to make sure we're careful about that. We're also proposing to decrease business licensing revenues by about 5%. So we've just seen sadly, we've seen a decrease in the number of business licenses in the past year. Utility tax has typically in the past been very strong, kind of a stable source, but in the last 4 or 5 years, we've seen a big change in this utility tax. Electric and gas makes up about 40%, and we're seeing a decrease in those this year. Landline telephone services, many people are moving towards just having a cell phone and doing away with a landline service. And then the biggest change in utility tax that we've been seeing over the last several years is cell phone utility tax has dropped because the data is exempt from utility tax due to the Internet Tax Freedom Act. So previously, cell companies only applied this exemption to just the standalone data plans. But over the last several years, we've seen all the cellular companies applying it to their bundled plans as well. So just as a comparison, back in 2016, we would get about 1.5 million from cell data utility tax. And this year, we're only expecting about 500,000. So a pretty significant decrease. So for utility taxes, we're recommending a reduction in tax revenue about 1 million for both 21 and 22. Development fees and building permit fees, we were expecting to see a slower recovery last fall when we did the budget. But 21 is outperforming our budget by about 13%. So we're planning to increase that about 200,000 this year. And then for 22, we did expect a full recovery in development fees, and they just still aren't, even though they're doing better this year, they're still not quite up to pre-pandemic numbers. So we're recommending to decrease 22 by about 300,000. So it just really depends on how the economy continues to move along, as well as really the availability of materials due to supply chain constraints. And then state shared revenues include liquor excise tax, fuel tax, criminal justice tax, just some miscellaneous taxes we receive. Even though we've seen some increases in some taxes like liquor profits, we've also seen some decreases for fuel taxes. So we are proposing to decrease the budget for 21 only by 5% or 180,000 for this revenue source. And then just some other high level adjustments for the general fund revenues. We see gambling tax has gone up about 22%, so we're proposing to increase that about 500,000. Fines and forfeitures are outperforming original budget, so this is red light ticket and school zone infractions, so that's up about 8%, so we're going to be increasing that about 100,000 for 2021. Public safety revenue approximately 12% higher, which is increasing that about 100,000, and then we added the ARPA grant funds of 18.1 million to this budget adjustment. Some of the decreases in revenue that we're seeing is admission tax is down significantly, so we're going to be decreasing that about 130,000. I do anticipate that to rebound just with movie theaters and such opening back up. Those are a big driver for this tax, so we're not making any adjustment for 22 there. Parks and Recreation Center fees are down about 650,000, so that's about 60% lower than pre-pandemic figures. But with the rec center open now, I'm not making any changes or recommendation for changes for 22. And then interest earnings are down significantly. We had several long-term investments that matured in the last couple of years. And we just haven't been able to invest in anything that has really higher earning investments. We've been struggling finding some of those. So we are going to be decreasing our budget for revenue in regards to interest for both years by about 620,000. So this is just a snapshot summary of just all the revenue adjustments I just quickly went over. Overall for 21, we're looking to increase the revenue budget of 19.7 million. Now, most of that, about 19.1, is from grants, so the ARPA grant as well as some other miscellaneous grants. So overall, just general revenues, it's going to be increasing for 21 about 600,000 and 22 about 625,000. And then on the expenditure side, we just kind of highlighted some of the larger items as well. Some we've already discussed with council, which would be the allocation of some of the ARPA funds, citywide reorganization, as well as some police body cameras. But some other items to note, I'm proposing to move some money to our stabilization fund. So we have our stabilization policy that requires us to reserve 12% of our general fund revenue in our stabilization fund. And so we weren't able to move any of those funds last year. So I'm recommending to do so to stay in compliance with that policy. We're also proposing to put aside some funding for some capital facilities that our parks maintenance building is aging pretty significantly, and we also have some possible parks property site purchases that we want to do. And so, as I mentioned earlier, it's really wise to set aside any additional sales tax from construction sales tax growth to invest in one-time items or infrastructure. And so, just because those could be very cyclical, so we want to be kind of looking more long-term with those. Oops, my light just went off. There it goes. As a reminder, the increases summarized here also include increases for human services funding that we had been discussing. It's almost $2 million through just additional staff and direct support and use of grant funds that we talked about a couple weeks ago. This is just a summary of proposed changes of positions that we typically kind of give you a nice snapshot of any changes that we did during the year for staffing. And so we've noted here in this last column that whether they've been approved previously or already made adjustments for those. And so a lot of these here are from the reorganization that we did. And then the second page just shows some that we previously had already made changes for in the other budget adjustments we did in April and July. So overall, the total adjustment to FTE for 21, we're increasing it by 6.35. FTEs are 1.4 million for the general fund. So this is just kind of a snapshot after we make all the budget adjustments. We're still showing that we'll be using about 1.4 of our fund balance. But just to remember, this is a little bit skewed just because we do have those ARPA funds in there in our revenue bucket of the 18.1 million. So this is the slide we always kind of come back to, that when we talked last fall or last spring at the council retreat, we were talking about that our ending fund balance possibly could be 30.7 million negative, and so now we're showing it to be about 17.4 negative, so not near as severe. As we kind of talked about earlier, this change is largely due to the quick works that we made last year when the pandemic hit. We were really fast about making some deep cuts and to really make some changes quickly to account for some of those projected revenue losses. And the also positive change here is just we've had some revenues that have rebounded quicker than we originally had thought. Sales tax and B&O tax have recovered faster, so that's helping with the overall outlook. Even though after we worked through some of the hurdles of the pandemic that it brought to us financially, Renton still continues to be challenged like most cities over the long term, given the imbalance of tax limitations and how much costs go up on an annual basis. We are projected to end 22 with a fairly healthy fund balance, and hopefully with the conservative estimates that are built into this budget, improving economic conditions, and just really our continued efforts to be lean and identify efficiencies, we hope that this projection will improve over time. We're always looking for ways to improve our financial outlook, and as we discussed at the council retreat, because we know we are using fund reserves, we may need to have a larger discussion as we build the 23-24 budget. We're also planning to come talk with council next week about our B&O tax structure. In addition to the general fund, we have some non-general fund adjustments that we're proposing, just kind of a high level of just some of the larger items. One is for the House Bill 1590 for housing and supportive services. This is that extra 0.1% sales tax revenue, as well as the approved spending thus far from council that you've approved. This is the new revenue source that 100% of it is to go to support housing and supportive services, which has enabled the city to allocate almost 2.6 million of additional funds for these resources. The other adjustment is REIT revenues. These continue to come in higher as well. And just as a reminder, these funds are restricted and can be used for capital purposes. And we also use this for debt service payment for prior capital improvements. So REIT is unpredictable, so we tend to just be very conservative when we budget this. So 21 collections are really outperforming what we had budgeted by $2 million. So we're proposing to increase the 21 budget by $2 million. However, no budget is planned for 22 in order just to stay conservative. It's really better to have this money in hand before we spend that. As I mentioned earlier, we have some aging facilities that are badly in need of some improvements. So we've set aside some for various maintenance. And then lastly, we have an adjustment to recognize the Department of Commerce grant for the Family First construction. So this is just a snapshot of what those balances look like after this budget adjustment. And then part of the mid-buy budget adjustment is we're also asking council to approve some fee schedule changes. And this will be part of a resolution brought forward to council. So the changes include an update to the 2022 Maplewood Golf Course fees. We would like to add a small cell site license addendum. And we want to update our right-of-way permit fees for areas along the Lake Washington waterfront. Also, a few fees that we collect on behalf of other agencies. We're updating the school impact fees imposed by the school districts, and we're updating the fire marshal fees imposed by the RFA. So this was just a quick summary of where we're at with the mid-buy, and some of the actions, just to recap, is we'll want to set the property tax levy for 2022. We'll need to adopt the budget adjustments by ordinance, and we'll need to update the fee schedule by resolution. And that is all I have. I'm not sure if anybody has any questions.
I'd like to ask council members any questions at this time? Let's see, I can go to a screen where I can see if there's hands up. Okay, I don't see any. So, well, very nice job, Carrie. Thank you. I guess I have...
Ryan's got his hand up.
Oh, okay, good. Ryan, please go ahead.
Thank you. Sorry, I was slow to raise it. Always like to wait and see if others have questions first. The one question I had, and I'm assuming, would it be correct assuming the unallocated ARPA funds would show up on the next budget adjustment since we haven't spent them in this one? Is that why they're not showing up on the revenue side still?
They're showing up on the revenue side in this budget adjustment, and then only the $3.6 million
on the expenditures
that we have approved to spend is showing up, and then the rest is unallocated at this time.
Okay, thanks. Sorry, I apologize. I must have missed the first part.
Oh, that's okay. I know there was a lot of numbers and a lot of data, so.
And yes, Councilmember Halloran.
Thank you. So just to follow up on Mr. McCurvin's question, if we have not, there's $15 million toward the fund balance that is yet to be spent from the ARPA funds.
Yes.
So does that make our dipping into the fund go faster when we actually spend those dollars?
Well, I'm going to just quickly share my screen because I think a picture is always so much easier to understand.
Thank you.
See if I can do this again.
Yeah.
So right here, I recognized the ARPA funds, and then I stuck out into future years just because we're looking at the mid-buy budget, so 21 and 22, since we haven't approved any other spending besides the 3.6. I stuck out the rest of it, and the one-time use is out here. So this one-time use is the $15 million that we have not allocated of the ARPA, as well as some debt payment that we have in future years. So it's already in this picture.
Okay, excellent. Thank you. Thank you for that clarification.
Other questions? Yes, Councilmember Benedetti.
Thank you, Council President. So thank you so much, Carrie. This is so thorough. And really I encourage anyone who's watching to go back and look at all of the extras that you put on the agenda, because it's a work of art, all this budgetary. Can we go back to slide 12? The other revenue adjustments.
Yes.
I just, you'd mentioned in there the fact that Parks and Recreation were underperforming in 21, but the expectation was that they would revive in 22. Is that, are we still expecting that, given the, some of the building rentals and questions around, events with people having to be, vaccinated for events and those kinds of things? Are we still anticipating that those will be the same?
At this point, I'm not going to adjust anything for 22, but we do have the ability to continue to adjust next year. I'm waiting just to see how things play out for 22. When we did the budget adjustment, or when we prepared the budget last year, we just planned on a slow recovery. So we weren't even at full capacity in 22's budget with Parks and Recs, just because we weren't sure when it was going to be opening. So we'll just continue to watch it.
Thank you.
Okay, and I guess I'm, Councilmember Perez.
Thank you. If you go back, thank you for your presentation. Actually, it was very good, and I know how hard it is to put together these presentations. This is a very timely issue to start looking at the revenue and start seeing the budget. Can the slide that you just put, you're talking about the public safety increase?
Mm-hmm.
Again, can you talk a little bit more about that?
Yeah, so for public safety, we bill out for services. So we might go and we do some work for IKEA to do some street, trying to think, some movement of some cars to make sure that things are safely moving. We help with some school resource officer work with the Renton School District. And so those are the types of things that are in the public safety revenue section. So we also help with the Seattle Seahawks, making sure that they get to and from their airplane safely. So those are the types of things that we have in there. Now these were quite a bit lower. We planned on them to be quite a bit lower, largely because we were not billing out for the school resource officer with the Renton School District. And so because schools are back open, we wanted to go ahead and adjust that up for that.
Thank you.
Good. Other questions? Okay, well, let's see. I think that's the only thing we have on the agenda for tonight, right? So I think I'm just about to adjourn the meeting unless anybody has any final thoughts or comments on this. Of course, it's not the last time we get a chance. If there'd be a public hearing and some other, so council does have questions, you can still get them asked. But
Yes, we will be talking about this again in 2 weeks.
all right. Okay, well, thank you very much again, Ms. Roller, for the great presentation, and thank you, council. And with that, I'll go ahead and adjourn the committee of the whole, and we'll reconvene as a council in about 46 minutes at 7 p.m. Thank you.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Bye.